guys? Have a fantastic week so far. Bringing us a different video doing 200 clones versus 200 Stormtroopers. Who would win? I thought this would be pretty cool because we really haven't done a Star Wars its own video in quite a while, and it's a pretty hot topic. Like, who's better, clones or Stormtroopers? Me personally, I always go with the clones. An individual like clone versus Stormtrooper, the clones will win. The thing that kind of gets in my head though is the Stormtroopers are more modern and have better gear, and they have like, well, I could say a lot more troops, but it's 200 versus 200. But they just have better gear because they are, you know, the next step after the Republic. Hence why the Empire came into play. So it's a big close one. I mean, I'm gonna lean towards clones just because I'm just biased and I hate Stormtroopers because Empire bad. but no, I like to hear what you guys think in the comments. And like always, please check out the original video in the description. Show them some love. If you guys like my content, you guys reactions, please don't forget to like, subscribe. Let's get to it.
Hello friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. In recent videos, we've talked about how Emperor Palpatine was looking to create a politically loyal military force that was separate from the traditional Navy and Army forces that were loyal to the state. We mentioned how the clone troopers would have been perfect for this role if not for the prohibitive costs of their development and maintenance and the gradual degradation of their source DNA. We also went into depth about how the Stormtrooper Corps developed as a program. And so the natural progression is for us to just pit these two organizations against each other in a hypothetical battle and see which one is actually better. Even though the Clone Army is much older than the Stormtrooper Corps and uses older technology, both organizations were created for a different type of conflict and purpose, and I think they're better matched than...
I think it comes down to is the Republic was made, at least the clone troopers were made to fight a large-scale military versus military war. While the Empire was made to be a security for a galaxy. They're made for small skirmishes, small scale combat. They're not as equipped or skilled per se as a clone trooper, because a clone trooper is made for a complete different reason. Like he said, like they're pinned up against, you know, another rival power that is massive. I mean, the droid army is specialized troops, numbers. I mean, all that. I mean, it was a completely different, you know, ball game than like the Rebel Alliance, which was nothing compared to the Republic or the Separatists.
And some might expect. We'll be breaking this video down into 5 separate categories. First, we're going to take a look at the training of both organizations, followed by their motivations, then their weapons, and then followed by their vehicles and support. At the very end, we'll do an assessment of what a skirmish between a unit of clone troopers and stormtroopers will actually look like, what are the key factors, and what determines which side will win. We'll be using a company size element for both sides, which is usually a few hundred troops broken down into 3 or 4 different platoons. And obviously I want to see what your opinions are in the comment section down below. I mean, these are the type of videos where I love going through the comments, seeing where I stand versus where you guys stand. Also, while you're down there, you know, why not hit that subscribe and notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. Let's begin.
Less yapping, more blasting!
Their training is next to none, dude. They do the best training.
So training. This is something that the clone troopers have an edge over almost every other military force in galactic history. Each fat clone is literally born for combat, and everything they do from the second they can walk has to do with soldiering. The clones have accelerated aging, which means it takes just 9 years for them to go from test tube to the battlefield. During this time period, they are constantly being educated, trained, and tested, not only by instructors and teachers, but they were also being observed by these dolphin-like genetic engineers. There was always this unspoken threat that the Kaminoans dangled in front of the clones that if they didn't perform the way they wanted them to, they would just be recycled. You know, think corpse starch. But with nothing else to occupy their time and no other potential pathway in life, I mean, most clones either got with the program or they corpse starch. And so most of them would just fully embrace their future of becoming soldiers. The clones' education was very well structured and involved rapid education via flash learning. There were also special focus enhancing helmets that maximize absorption of information. I really wish I had one of those when I write my scripts.
Dude, same, dude. I just
and so if you add up all of their training together, these clones have roughly the same amount of classroom time as a college student who has gone for the bachelor's, master's, and PhD. You're also probably retaining and soaking up knowledge at a very increased rate.
I didn't know that they were like that
is about
intelligent.
Becoming a soldier, so there are no distractions, no partying, no girlfriends, no jobs you have to take to afford rent. These things are all shoved aside. And so you can say that each one of these clones have a doctorate in being infantry soldiers, and all of these clone troopers are also cross-trained in a variety of different disciplines as well. Although every clone is an infantryman first, they also know how to operate every piece of weaponry and machinery in the JAR, along with most of the vehicles. Prior to the Battle of Coruscant, the 501st was actually stationed on Coruscant. They were enjoying some much-deserved R&R, and they were also being refitted because at the time the Republic Starfighter Corps had suffered huge casualties and was struggling to replace their numbers, so they were basically training infantry soldiers on how to fly these things using simulators. Now, when the Battle of Coruscant would actually start, the 501st would play a big role in fighting off the Separatist invasion.
That's crazy,
they would take
dude.
off in a bunch of ARC-170s.
I did not know that they did that.
Along with their education.
This shows how smart and flexible they are, dude. Just to be able to pick that up just by doing simulations and then being a part of one of the most important space battles, potentially, in the entire war. It's a battle. It's basically for the Battle of the Republics. If they lost Coruscant, they basically lose the war. Sure, I mean, Camino's important, but that's like the capital of the Republic.
There are also state-of-the-art simulations for the clones. Some of these simulations even use live rounds to make the situation feel more realistic. It wasn't uncommon for clone troopers to die in training. It happened all the time. This allowed soldiers to practice all of their theory in a more controlled setting. It was as close to the real thing as you could get. That, along with the daily PT exercises, made these clones as ready for the battlefield as humanly possible.
Cadets, you entered this facility as children, and in a few short weeks, you will leave as soldiers.
A few weeks.
The whole appeal of the Stormtrooper Corps is that the first 18 years of these soldiers' lives are subsidized by the parents of the galaxy, and so unlike the Kaminoans, the Empire didn't really have to change that many diapers. You join the Stormtrooper Corps in two ways. Either you distinguish yourself on the battlefield as an Imperial Army trooper or naval trooper and be recommended to join the Stormtrooper Corps, or you meet the requirements in general testing when you're still in the academy and are sent to the...
I mean, their big difference is that it's not based off of a elite bounty hunter. They're not genetically modified / you could say perfect per se to be soldiers. They're just people who are just better than the rest. You know, that's where they kind of fall short. But again, they're not made to fight a scale of war like the clone troopers did. They're made to just be security. So I mean, they kind of fit the role because again, at the end of the day, you don't have to grow them, and you have theoretically infinite amount of potential troopers. That's why Palpatine switched.
Stormtrooper pipeline, basically. Training actually started pretty young. We see with the Academy of Young Imperials on Lothal, the youngest Stormtrooper cadets are around 13 years old. These individuals would undergo a very ruthless training regime where PT and overall toughness was beat into their heads. There was also a culture of dehumanizing the cadets, breaking down their ego and worldview so that they could be more easily molded into the perfect soldiers the Empire wanted to turn them into. There's also a lot of competition built into a lot of the exercises and training. Basically, usually only the winners of said exercise was granted additional training or some type of reward.
You are descending into the well and must climb out with all deliberate speed. You'll be given the honor of serving as aides in Imperial headquarters. Those who lose will be serving Taskmaster Grit and wish they'd stayed at the bottom of that well.
Whereas the clones were trained with the same squad from youth and developed some great camaraderie and teamwork skills, the Stormtroopers were more focused on being extremely obedient and proficient at following orders. They were basically supposed to be interchangeable cogs in a much larger machine. Any trooper who was deemed to be too individualistic or, too rebellious was immediately wiped out of the program. Or worse, corpse starch. The violence and brutality that the instructors inflicted on the cadets, and also the cadets were encouraged to inflict on each other, not only made these troopers physically tougher, it made them also fear and respect authority.
There's a difference right there too. Not including all the stuff we know already, but like with the Jedi and the Republic, especially with the clone troopers, they wanted individual traits. When individualism, I can say that right, so just don't mind that. But that's why, like, the 501st, the 212th, all of them, they all had different color schemes. They all had special designs on their armor because the Jedi were like, you do what you want, have your own personality, be you, separate yourself from, the others, make yourself who you want to be and not think you need to be. And when the Empire came in, they kind of took that all away. The best example is if you watch The Bad Batch, spoilers, you can skip, but they showed Cody. And, Cody has this nice design with his orange, really stand out, very easy to find them. And he still had the same kind of markings, but they were grayed out. Because Empire doesn't want you to be individuals. They want you just to be like a cog in a machine. They want you just to be the exact same duplicate machine. You know, that's why all the clones just had pale white armor again. You know, like they're back on Geonosis, you know. So that's where they really differ. One wants you to be individuals, the other one wants you to be anything but individuals.
Individuals who did not fit the physical, skill, or intelligence requirements were washed out as well. Or worse, corpse starch. The Stormtroopers were not as well cross-trained as the clones were, although they could operate most small arms.
I mean,
and
they're
heavy
still
weapons
elite, though.
used by
They're
the
just not as good as
Stormtroopers,
clones,
along
but
with
they're still
many
elite.
vehicles. And this was mainly
The movies
because
don't
the
do justice to
Stormtroopers,
them.
unlike the clone troopers, were considered light infantry. This just means that
Not
they
close.
are very lightly equipped,
Movies, TV shows,
and are
make it
very
look like a
mobile
joke.
and can go from one theater of war
Just
to
not
another very
true.
quickly.
He's doing what a soldier does, sacrificing himself for the lives of others.
Clone troopers first and foremost serve the Republic. These fat clones were indoctrinated with the history of the galaxy and pledged their loyalty to serve the people. This is probably at the root of a lot of the more humane stories we see in the Clone Wars, where individual clone troopers would go to great lengths to protect innocent civilians. You also had guys like Captain Hauser, voted best groomed clone by GQ,
Hauser,
who ultimately
dude,
sided
legend.
with the R'hllor people against the Empire because of the education he was given. Now, the Kaminoans did screw around with the Fett clones' DNA to try to make them more obedient and docile. And while that might have worked to a certain degree, the clones
chip
would
in
also
their head.
develop very unique and individual
well.
personalities due to their extreme experiences during the war. In Legends, the Mandalorian trained clone commandos seem to have a much higher survival rate than the non-Mandalorian trained clone commandos. So the nature versus nurture debate here is very much alive in this massive, what I like to call, twin experiment. Interestingly enough, the clones were also heavily influenced by the Jedi they served beneath.
Thank
If you
you.
look at
I
Anakin's
saw about that.
501st, there were several clone
Nice.
troopers who were as reckless and fearless as Anakin was. Then you have Commander Cody, who's very cautious and deliberate in how he approaches battle situations. He's clearly learned something from Obi-Wan Kenobi,
Very
who has
much
very
so.
similar personality traits. I feel like the clones who were taught by the Jedi to be more individualistic reached their full potential, and they fought like lions on the battlefield, not just for the Jedi commanders or for the Republic, but also for each other. They were a true
Brotherhood.
band of brothers. Despite all of the Republic conditioning and indoctrination, by the last year of the war, many veteran clones had grown wary of their situation and had awoken to the reality of their lives. But since all these clones knew was the Grand Army of the Republic, and, basically the clones was the only family they had no other choice but to stick it out.
They're basically
and continue
slaves.
fighting until the very end.
Move it!
Just sad.
Don't you look at me! Move it!
In order to understand the Imperial military, you have to first understand the Tarkin Doctrine. The Empire faced two problems: an emperor who was unwilling to relinquish even the smallest amount of control or power to the local governments, and therefore you also had a central government that had to take on a monumental task of providing security for the entire galaxy. And two, there was the realization that this would probably be impossible. The Empire was simply too large, and especially in the Outer Rim, it was way too sparsely populated. And so Tarkin's doctrine was all about using the threat of force to create obedience from its many
Which is
systems.
I
The
mean,
Death Star is the
not a
most
terrible
obvious
idea.
and threatening part of this ideology, but at the
Didn't
ground
work
level,
out,
the
but-
Stormtroopers also helped build this image that the Empire was invincible and a major power in the galaxy and not to be trifled with. This is why every Stormtrooper is wearing a helmet that covers his face. It becomes hard for local citizens to count their numbers or identify individuals. They might as well be robots. This also allows a Stormtrooper to carry out terrible acts of brutality against the local populace without actually having to look them in the eyes. The Stormtroopers also had their comms monitored by the ISB, and this was so that there would be no idle chatter during missions. The ISB really did not want any Stormtroopers to build relationships with any of their squaddies, because again, these were cogs in a machine. Attachments to individuals could make it harder for a Stormtrooper to sacrifice or leave behind a comrade for the mission. Bodies were cheap, and, they tried to do everything possible to protect the image of the Empire. Because the second people started realizing that these Stormtroopers could be defeated and that these ISDs could be shot down, it was game over for the
Yep.
Empire.
This one here
Lose
is
your grip on
mine.
them all.
Ha.
Lose your
Big
image.
gun doesn't make a big
Lose your
man.
leverage.
Clone Troopers wore either Phase 1 or Phase 2 armor, the latter being...
By the way, I'm just going to put this out because I know a lot of people love Phase 2 armor. I love Phase 1 Clone Trooper armor, and the reason for it is it's different than all the different other phases. Like Phase 2 is similar to the TK Trooper and similar to the, Stormtrooper armor. What's cool about Phase 1 is it's similar to the Mandalorian armor. It just is different, it looks smooth, and it looks clean. I know a lot of people probably aren't fans of Phase 1. I love the Phase 1 armor, man. It just looks clean as shit.
far more
Love it.
modular and comfortable.
Phase 2 is
albeit
clean though,
sacrificing
don't get me
a
wrong.
little
I
bit
love
of
me some
protection.
Phase 2
Standard
armor.
clones
Phase
were
1
equipped
just
with
hits
a
different, dude.
DC-15 blaster rifle or carbine variant, along with several grenades and electromagnetic pulse grenades, or droid poppers. I'm not exactly sure they'll be that useful against Stormtroopers. Officers were
Stun
also
'em and
equipped with blaster pistols, sometimes
take
for
out
dual-wielding
troopers, can't
purposes.
kill 'em with it,
For heavy
though.
weapons, we're going to limit the clones to the Z6 rotary blaster cannon for suppression fire. I really don't like this weapon. I don't like how it seems to be designed to be fired from the hip instead of being mounted onto some kind of support.
I think you
It
could.
just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We'll also give the clones light mortars like the ones they used in Umbara, along with
If you
the
guys are now watching
RTS-6
Umbara, watch it
rocket
right now.
launcher
Drop
system
anything you're
from
doing.
Senior.
Get off this
Lightweight
video and go
and
watch
good enough
Umbara.
for most small to medium sized
Best arc in the entire TV series.
You know, Stormtrooper armor is labeled as garbage by what I considered, very biased individuals like clone Captain Rex. He definitely prefers the clone trooper gear for obvious reasons. Just like in a dream world, I would rather have a stick shift than an automatic, a motorcycle with a carburetor rather than EFI, but, what I am nostalgic to, what I romanticize,
Isn't the Stormtrooper
doesn't
armor built
necessarily
for the
mean those
individual?
things are going
That's
to
why
be
it's like
better
other people
than the more
can't
modern
wear it.
technology. So the Stormtrooper armor, while maybe
Wow,
not
I
as
didn't hear
high
about
quality
that.
because of production issues with having to fit a large range of bodies and head sizes, definitely isn't going to be much worse than clone trooper armor. That just kind of seems stupid. Neither armor is going to protect you fully from a blaster shot anyway. More importantly, Stormtrooper helmets were quite advanced compared to the clone trooper helmets because they do have targeting information fed into them, something that the clones didn't have in their helmets. Now, the Stormtroopers probably had less range time than the clone troopers, but I think having a heads-up display with targeting information does even the playing field somewhat. Then you have the standard issue Stormtrooper weapon, which was the
information's
E11.
the most
That essentially is an
powerful asset.
updated version of the DC-15A carbine.
I mean,
Not
everyone
too
knows
big of
that.
a difference there, except for, again, the
Information's
heads-up
huge.
targeting display. The Stormtroopers did have a much bigger variety of different small arms, including the T-21 light repeating blaster for suppression duties, the DLT-19 heavy blaster, good for armored foes, and finally the DLT-20A marksman rifle, along with a variety of different other weapons as well. For heavier weapons, the Stormtroopers had the HH-12, which is a bit more robust than the rocket launcher the clones used. The Stormtroopers also had a crew-served E-Web heavy repeating blaster, which is quite serious. I know the clones also used the E-Web, but it seems like Stormtroopers usually had machine gun teams in their company-sized elements, and they would actually deploy these pretty effectively. The one strange thing about the Stormtrooper Corps is they don't seem to have as many detonators, so that's just not a thing for them for some reason.
Good thing those bugs can't aim.
So the JAR has a wide assortment of vehicles and starships that we could choose from, but since this is a company-sized element, we're going to keep it simple, and we're going to focus on the very important LAAT modular transport system. That's what I like to call it. This includes the LAAT infantry variant, which can deploy an entire platoon of clones, 30 men, out of wide double doors for quick retrieval and deployment. And then you have the LAAT transport variant that can deploy an entire ATTE walker onto the battlefield. Both variants can launch from vacuum and drop into orbit. They can also stay on station after deploying units to provide anti-infantry support or use those chain-fed rockets, which is just the most awesome sounding phrase, to take out heavier targets. The ATTE Walker was at its core an infantry fighting vehicle. It featured several anti-personnel lasers on board and a very large direct fire mass driver cannon. Great for taking out fortifications or enemy positions, and it also could be used for light anti-tank duties. The ATTE AATs could also deploy ATRT recon walkers, which I'm honestly not a huge fan of. The profile is a bit too tall, but they were pretty quick. The clones could also get support from the AB-7 anti-vehicle cannon, which could also fire HE rounds. This thing was a self-propelled artillery platform. Now, as far as air support goes, the GAR heavily depended on the BTLB Y-Wing. This low-flying hog was terrific at dropping precision munitions on a specific target or just taking out an entire ridgeline and denying access to enemy forces. Either way, the ground pounders really loved this thing.
If I get one more ad in this video, I'm gonna flip shit. Ridiculous.
Now, a Stormtrooper company usually relies heavily on Imperial Navy and Army assets. Generally speaking, Stormtroopers are ferried into battle either on the Lambda-class shuttle, which does have more spaceflight capabilities, being hyperdrive equipped, but it lacks the same type of firepower that the LAAT does. It really can't stay on station and provide close air support. It could also only hold around 20 soldiers. The Stormtroopers also have the Imperial Transport, which looks like a Higgins boat, which could actually hold around 36 Stormtroopers. Both ships feature a front ramp for offloading and loading. The LAAT patrol variant was used more often for peacekeeping in Imperial settlements. The Empire mainly depended on the massive AT-AT Walker and the AT-ST for fire support. Both platforms are quite visible, but also are pretty heavily armored and armed. The AT-AT specifically is incredibly hard to take down, unless you have some larger tactical assets at play. Otherwise, you're going to just be bouncing rockets and shells off of this thing and pissing it off. Now, for quicker and more low-key movement, the Stormtroopers depended on the K-79 S-80 Imperial Troop transports. Since most Stormtrooper companies are deployed from the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, the Empire's ultimate firepower came in the form of orbital fire support from the gigantic turbo lasers on board the ISD. This is perhaps one of the most powerful conventional weapons on any battlefield. It's really the ultimate equalizer.
Teach these clones just how obsolete they are.
Boys, this might be it. At least we'll go down fighting like a clone should.
So the clones are going to be structured more like a Western fighting force, as in it's going to be all about small unit tactics. You're going to have a lot more leadership from NCOs. This basically allows
More
you
like
to
a real
be
military.
more flexible, and you're going to be able to operate independently from your leader of the company. The clones also really needed to be effective with using their fire support when tackling a much larger wave attack style enemy like the Separatist Alliance. The clones also had to be pretty well prepared for most battles. Every soldier had an idea of what the battle plan was in case they were pushed into a leadership position. There generally is very good communication amongst these clone units. They've known each other for like a decade now. They've probably fought for many years alongside each other, and also there is a well-established chain of command should an officer get
respect
taken.
too.
The clones also really heavily relied on mobility and could carry out some pretty complex maneuver warfare. Probing attacks, feints, flanking maneuvers, anything to keep the enemy off balance and guessing what their next action is going to be. Interestingly enough, the Empire does share some similarities with the droid army that the clones are used to fighting, in that they're not afraid of overwhelming the enemy with bodies when a decisive victory is near. Now, of course, Imperial commanders are going to be more competent than their Separatist droid counterparts, but honestly, not by that much.
Yeah,
the Imperial
that's pushing
command
it.
did have NCOs, but they didn't usually take charge of smaller units, only on assignment. The Empire featured a very officer-driven.
What was the second iteration of the tactics droid? I can't remember the name of it, but they had one that was kind of incompetent, and then the new model came out towards the end of the war, and it was like hyper intelligent. I can't remember the name of it, but those kind of leadership roles, I think, would outdo anything in the Empire to a point. I'm not saying that it's better than Tarkin and all that, which is just not true. But I think the droids, what comes with just pure flexibility, I think is where they can definitely beat the Empire, which is why they had to get shut down, because if they didn't get shut down, ooh.
Command structure. And so your captain or major is going to lead the company, and you're also going to have some lieutenants in as platoon leaders. But the Stormtroopers, even though they're pretty elite, I mean, compared to the clone troopers and their crazy upbringing and training, the Imperials are going to be just far less coordinated and flexible in how they attack, even if their battlefield management system might give them more information on what's happening. The Stormtroopers, ideally, if they're smart, would fight a defensive battle. The clones can quickly outmaneuver the Empire. They have far more mobility thanks to their vehicles and even loadouts.
Better
But that's
tactics,
fine. The
better
Empire
skill.
has a lot more firepower. They should just
Lot
have
more.
prepared firing positions and use
Lot
all
more.
of their repeating blasters and E-webs, which the clones really don't have access to. I mean, that Gatling gun is just stupid. You have to expose yourself to fire. And so, yeah, there's going to be a huge disparity in what kind of firepower each side has. It kind of reminds me of the difference between a standard German rifle platoon versus the standard European rifle platoon in the earlier years of World War II. The Germans had a lot of machine guns, like everywhere. Now, if the Empire is considered light infantry, I would label the clone troopers as a mix between airborne and mechanized infantry. When it came to fire support, they heavily depended on their ATTEs, but unfortunately these things will be completely outmatched by the Empire's AT-ATs, which are only going to be vulnerable to the Y-Wings and maybe the gunships, but those could get shot down really easily. The AT-ST should be easy to take down with the AT-TEs or any handheld rocket launcher system, but again, they're going to most likely stay right next to their bigger brothers,
light
the
armor.
AT-AT.
Yeah.
The problem for the clones is if they get to the point where they're about to overwhelm a Stormtrooper position, the Imperial officer in command can just scream broken arrow into the comms, and that Star Destroyer hanging overhead is usually more than happy to wipe out an entire battlefield and kill a bunch of Imperials at the same time. Because you get commendments in the Empire for killing enemies. You don't get punished nearly as much for losing a company of Stormtroopers. I feel like because of the disparity in firepower, along with this orbital situation, the clones would be forced on the attack. If they waited in a defensive position and stopped moving around, they would eventually get surrounded by the Empire and easily destroyed. The clones have to rely on their mobility, and ideally, if they manage to fool the Empire into pursuing them so that they can catch them while not in a prepared position, I think they can do a lot of damage. Especially if they outflank their enemies, use the terrain, use their LAATs to get, kind of verticality over the Empire, the high ground always wins. I think the clones have a chance. But as you can see, this is going to be a lot closer than what most people realize. I mean, I put a poll up there on my community post, and I saw that most people believe that the clones would win this fight. I think like 95% of people voted that. But I really think it's more closer to 50-50. It really depends on what your battlefield situation looks like, who's going to be leading both sides, right? I didn't include Jedi because although Jedi did lead company-sized elements for the clones, it's not really fair putting a Jedi in this scenario. We're talking about one company of clones versus one company of Stormtroopers. It's really a test between better soldiers versus better equipment. And if you guys really don't believe me and you think the clones are the best thing ever created, remember, a lot of clone companies were wiped out by separatist droid battalions that were far less competent than the Empire.
Yeah,
I think a lot of us have probably
now
watched the Clone Wars TV series, which unfortunately is just glorified propaganda for the Republic. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I look forward to seeing your comments and discussions down below. Don't forget.
That was good. I mean, he made good points about the Stormtroopers. I mean, I could see why it would sway towards the Stormtroopers, at least in like a head-on battle like this. Just because of the fact that they just have better gear. They have better equipment. It's more modernized. They're built more for just pure force. Like, it's basically they took the Republic stuff and just amped it up to 11. That's basically what they did. I mean, even their E11 blaster is the next generation after the Clone Troopers DC blasters. It's the same thing as that. It's the next evolution after. I still think clones are superior to Stormtroopers in almost any feasible way, but that does not mean that their equipment is superior. So I can see why he leans towards the Stormtroopers winning. But like you said, it depends on the terrain, depends on what battle's going on, depends about what is going on. But again, I'd like to know what you guys think in the comments. Tell me who you guys think would win and why. If you guys enjoyed this video, please check them out in the description. Show them some love. If you guys enjoy my content, if you guys enjoy my reactions, please don't forget to like and subscribe. See you guys next one. Take it easy.